Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast episode for the Progressive Democrats of Howard County. This is episode number 27. My name is Jake Burdett. I am one of the co-hosts of the podcast, joined by the other co-host and president of Progressive Democrats of Howard County, Hiruy. How you doing on this stormy evening, Hiruy?
Hey, Jake, very good. Jake, I keep telling you that you should not be sharing the context of what's happening around, around you, so that, people don't figure out exactly what time and when this podcast is happening. And so anyways, I'm doing well, and it's good to be with you.
Yeah, I blew our cover there. Sorry about that. But yeah, nonetheless, we're very excited about this podcast episode and the topic that we're touching on. Of course, it is the month of June. That is Pride Month. We had actually meant to record this episode on this topic, much earlier in the month. And so we apologize for getting it out kind of at the last second here, but better late than never, right? And so on that note, as I said, it is Pride Month. And I don't know if it's because Pride Month or if it's just a coincidence, but we have seen a really noticeable uptick in LGBTQ plus or incidents of hatred and attacks against LGBTQ plus communities at the national level, at the local levels, including here in Maryland. So we're going to talk about some things that have been happening, especially in Montgomery County, also, in Howard County and at the national level, and really focus in on the theme of what does it mean to be an ally to the LGBTQ plus community. And so we've got two great guests on with us on this episode to share their perspective on these topics. And so going to give each of them a chance to introduce themselves and their connection to the issues and whatnot. And so would like to introduce our first guest, Ying.
Thanks, Jake and Hiruy. Thanks for having me. My name is Ying Matties. I use pronounce she, her. I am the current president of Community Allies of Rainbow Youth, Cary. I was one of the co-founders for that group about 4 years ago, and we became a registered nonprofit organization 2 years ago. And this work is really a very personal cause to me because I have a trans kid, and she came out to us while she was in college. So I did not go through that process. A lot of the parents, especially a lot of the Cary members, are parents or allies of younger kids who are currently in the school system, especially in Howard County. So they do go through the day-to-day struggle along with their kids, being the strongest advocates for them, and both, within the school and in the larger community. But I just felt like when we started this group, it was really the idea that building a safe and affirming community has to start with education. If our school system is a better place for these kids, everybody will become a better and educated and involved citizen with more empathy towards people of all different identities. So that's how we started, and then our focus is really close partnership with the school system. And we've definitely made a lot of progress, and there's a lot more work to be done. And we will probably talk about that later. The national climate and the local climate it's just really horrific to see that there's no justification to quit any job, any work now. And I know people are fired up, passionate about this, but there are also a lot of fear among the kids who are not necessarily directly impacted by all the actions, but they do see the climate. And so as allies, we are super committed to continuing our work.
Thank you, Ying. And we got another guest on as well. Mark, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, great. It's really good to be here. My name is Mark Eckstein. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a parent. I live in Montgomery County and have done a lot of advocacy around LGBTQ issues within our state, and focusing a lot here on Montgomery County with the schools as well. My formal role is with a PFLAG chapter. It's called the Metro DC PFLAG, where I'm the co-chair of Maryland Advocacy. And in that role, we do a lot of work on the state level, mostly with the Maryland General Assembly, but also in some of our local areas, especially the school boards. And it's great that Howard actually has their own chapter. So my jurisdiction doesn't necessarily run into Howard County. They have their own PFLAG. But with all these issues, it all kind of just melds together. And we're all here to kind of support this cause. So I'm happy to be here and happy to have these conversations.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks to our guests and a great introduction. I think the first question, Jake, I'm going to violate my rule and mention that today is June 30th, and the Supreme Court ruled on a case that was brought forward by a prospective or aspiring web designer who said that who claimed that she is not obligated to design a website for a I think the context is for a gay couple, and based on her religious beliefs, and the Supreme Court ruled on, I think, on a 6-3 basis that she is entitled to discriminate based on someone's sexual identity, and by using her religion, and so I wanted to get the reaction from our guests here, on that decision. And if you're not, it is fairly new. The decision was handed down today, so we could even sort of discuss it broadly on what it means, but just wanted to get your reaction here. We'll start with Ying.
Sure. I actually haven't. I just heard from when we started the conversation about the decision. I knew it was coming down today. So I guess, I'm not trying to play lawyer here, but I have heard a lot of some of the lawyers on the podcast talking about these Supreme Court cases. There's a general pattern that our society is moving forward. We're not turning back the clock. The decisions to give carve out more religious freedom being used as an excuse to discriminate and not following the general progress the rest of the society makes is to be expected almost. And it's extremely unfortunate. We have a very, very conservative Supreme Court that has been handing out these decisions. And we see that actually locally, and I'm sure Mark can talk about this more. In Montgomery County, there is a pending case against the school system, and it was heavily relying on this argument of freedom of religion to be used as an reason to opt out of inclusive curriculum. And so I'll maybe let Mark talk about that. And I think it resonates with the national pattern of, okay, sure, we can't turn back the clock. I'm sure there are people trying that to eliminate these laws and more protections, but we can use religion and fight it out in the court and use their religious allies and conservative allies on the court to give them protection, so-called protection.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue, because I always try with these issues to bring them as close to home as we can. So that would have been my original start to the response to your question. But I think it really shows, whether it's the lawsuit going on in Montgomery County, whether it's these lawsuits going all the way up to the Supreme Court, it really shows something that is really deep-seated and deep-rooted in our society. And as Maryland, it's a little complicated because technically we are kind of like a blue state, but the majority of our school districts, the majority of our counties are actually red, right? And so what I often say to people in Montgomery County and Howard County is whatever the percentages are, it's not like Kansas where maybe it's 60 or 70%, but it's still 20, 30, 40%. And so that's a very vocal group of our communities. And, I think it's almost in a way more complex here because there's that general notion, especially in our school system and increasingly so in Howard County, that like we're these progressive bubbles and it's blue and it's our kids are great, and and our LGBT community is just fine because now we have marriage equality. And I think these last couple of years, it's really the silver lining is that it's really, I think, emboldened us to face the reality that no, things are not fine. And I always try to bring it back to the students, especially the students I work with in Montgomery County, MCPS students. And it doesn't matter if it's 20% or 30%, or if it's in the Supreme Court, or if it's in, Howard County or Montgomery County, these lawsuits, it is just extremely harmful and dangerous for them to hear this narrative. And I see it translated into, just personal bias and personal incidents of harassment and hate. So I think that's the context. I mean, to me, it doesn't really matter what the entry point is, whether it's the books, the LGBT books in Montgomery County, or, this person in Colorado that doesn't want to deal with a gay couple. Those are just kind of the top of this deep-suited, and it's, I think, really important that to not deflect, right? I think a lot of us, even us, we like to deflect and we like to kind of dig deep into things that we know. But I always try to bring back people to the foundation that there is this deep-rooted, deep-seated kind of institutional bias. And unfortunately, a lot of that is driven from some certain political partisans, and also, unfortunately, just a small segment of our religious community. Obviously, the religious community is very broad, and just more of the socially conservative elements of that are driving a lot of this. So we can go a lot deeper into that, but that would be my response.
Yeah, no, thank you both for sharing. And yeah, it's even though it is at the national level, everything at the national level affects every local jurisdiction, and it is the law of the land, unfortunately. And so it is very scary stuff that they're opening the door for more legal discrimination against LGBTQ plus people. And I think it's important that both Ying and Mark mentioned, at least in this instance, yeah, they're hiding behind a legal justification to cover up what really is honestly just a bigoted point of view, but they sort of hide behind this legal argument, which in this context of both at the Supreme Court level and with what's going on in Montgomery County, both relating to this argument of religious freedom. And so people in the audience at home might be wondering, like, hey, you all are the progressive Democrats of Howard County. Why do you have on somebody from Montgomery County, and like what's going on in Montgomery County right now? How is that relevant? And so, Mark, to people who are watching who may not have been following at all what is happening in Montgomery County, could you sort of give a bit of a recap of the last few months, what's been happening there?
Sure, yes. What's happening here, I think, is emblematic of what's happening and kind of what will be happening in all of our 24 school districts, I think 23 or 24 counties. But precisely what's happening in Montgomery County relates to efforts. I mean, it's a complex story, so I'll try to narrow it down for you, but it's rooted in about a 5 or 6 year effort to kind of really diversify our English language arts, our English curriculum, and our instructional products and our books within really K through 12 English classes. And one of those initiatives involved LGBTQ inclusive, affirming books, basically storybooks. And if you look at the impetus for a lot of this, the state of Maryland, the Maryland State Department of Education, really mandates this. So it's really mind-boggling to me that it took MCPS so long. And it's even more shocking that the rest of we're the #1 leader in this around the state, and we're still super, super behind. there's a great quote from our superintendent about a month ago when she gave a really epic speech on hate bias. And she addressed this LGBTQ storybook controversy. And she said, which was really bold and just kind of sent shivers. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, you know, some in the media say that we are going too far by having inclusivity in our storybooks. And then she said, but my question is, why did it take so long? And why is it so few? And so that quote, I think, really is the driver of the current controversy, because the controversy comes from the fact that we have so little inclusion that parents mistaken it as something they can opt out about. So, you know, as a school system, I'm working with teachers and staff and things like, oh my God, we're not doing this right, because if there's only one 5-minute read aloud in all of elementary school and parents got confused and feel like they can opt out, that means there's not enough. And so it's so great that the MCPS leadership, you know, has that same realization as well, that in a way we made it stigmatizing, right? Because either all or nothing, you know, it's not just like a drop. And so because of that, you know, the core of this initiative is just a 5-minute read aloud that our English language curriculum uses as supplemental materials. And so it's very benign and very, very not a bold initiative. So people really shouldn't be freaking out. But what has happened is there's been a lot of misinformation. And to kind of answer your question, one thing led to another, and then these national organizations took this, and what we've seen with these issues nationally around LGBTQ, just total distortions, total mischaracterizations, and total mischaracterizations, to the point where you know, folks are talking about sex scenes for you know, kindergartners and things like that. And you know, those things can be really cleared up pretty quickly, but unfortunately it has been weaponized. And it's just, you know, it broke my heart to be at the protest a couple of days ago, because the majority of the protesters were new arrivals. They were immigrants. They were people of color. They were, you know, largely the Muslim faith, but other communities that have immigrants. And, you know, I think there were Ethiopians with Christian Orthodoxy. So it's not just one religion, but, you know, with the language barrier and with the cultural barrier and, you know, coming to a new country, I can understand, right? You know, that's why we're very empathetic to another community that's been superly marginalized. And, you know, they've been targets, or they've received information that is just totally incorrect, and they're very scared. And we have a lot to work to do, right, as a county, to engage in these communities. But I think, going back to our original question, is like, it is not helpful to have these malicious actors out there, like the ones that did the Supreme Court ruling today, and groups like Moms for Liberty, that really was the flame that allowed this to spread. And so that's kind of where we are, and it's very complex and many different layers. But I think a lot of progress has been made in the last couple of weeks to kind of get a handle of it and hopefully work some of these issues out.
So that's very helpful, Mark. Thank you. And so I want to connect what you just said, Mark, to another point, and then this is a question to Ying. From what you just said, Mark, it sounds like this initiative was supposed to be done a few years ago, and the school system is getting around to doing it now, and that has collided with some other events that have been taking place in the last 2 or 3 years, and that's created the perfect storm. You know, that's just my reading of it, and it's, you know, brought about this reaction from, I would agree, from the pictures, you know, a lot of immigrants, you know, that have heard what's being discussed in these schools and reacted, you know, perhaps I'm sorry to say, out of bigotry too. I think, you know, there is that element there too. To me, the question is, and maybe Ying, this question is to you, and you can sort of answer that, or take it whichever way you want. Why did it take so long, right? So until 2 or 3 years ago, there was a school system in Virginia where the national conservative movement saw it was opportune to start talking about library books, and started riling people up, and like that has sort of that's been conservatives have seen that as this ripe topic to rile people up about, and it's come about, it's come here in Howard County, it's over there in Montgomery County now. Why did it take so long? Why not, when you have a directive to do this, why not just implement it right away? Why wait until, here, this is the consequence of waiting, right? So why did it take so long?
So I can answer that first, and I think there's a second piece of it. Mark probably be able to answer better, because the directives boils down to basically this: when you talk about inclusive curriculum in the school system, it's a very complex, multi-layered issue. The state level can mandate these are the curriculum standards we want to follow. The MSD issued directives, and then there's COMAR, the Code of Maryland Regulation, will tell you exactly what you need to do, what kind of direction the curriculum should go. But it doesn't actually tell you what books you use, what does the written curriculum look like, let alone what the students would see in the actual classroom, what the teacher will actually deliver. So there are layers. Even if there's directive coming from the state level, when it comes to that being translated to material in the classroom, it takes years, takes interpretation, takes the leadership at the local school level to actually do the professional training, professional learning, and then also to mandate these are the things that we are teaching, we are using. What was impressive to me, what Mark said about Montgomery County, the recent case, or those books as used as the readout, the supplemental material for the English language art class, we don't have anything like that in Howard County. The curriculum's written in the language that is pretty inclusive, but it's not to the level that all the kids of all different identity, including immigrant students, will always see themselves reflected. They talk about windows and mirrors. However, what does that actually translate to the materials they see in the classrooms can be vastly different from school district to school district, and even across different schools, because every teacher will be able to do their own thing. In Howard County, they have a lot of autonomy. That could be potentially a good thing, because the teacher who is a strong ally, who understands these issues on a more complex and deeper level, they can go out of their way, they can go above and beyond to do what they think is the best to provide for their students. But the teacher who is not quite there, who's not properly trained, not comfortable using anything outside of their traditional cis-het normative structure, all very Eurocentric, white-centric kind of material, they don't have to. And there's nothing anybody can do about it in Howard County, at least. And we hopefully will try to change that. And I'll let Mark talk about the Inclusive School Act. I'm sure you're much more familiar with that, and then any other kind of a state level mandate that could direct us to a better direction.
No, that's a good point, especially with Howard County and Howard County Public Schools. But it's amazing how it's really a universal challenge in all of our school districts. And the original question about why did it take so long, and the quick answer is because it's really, really hard. And if Montgomery County Public Schools is facing this backlash, then that is a quick check for all the other superintendents in the county not to do this, right? Like, it is super hard. And it goes back to our original point about this lawsuit, in the sense that when we discussed this Supreme Court ruling, whether it's 20, 30, 40, those are teachers, those are students, those are parents. This opposition is emboldened, it's vocal, it's in Howard County, it's in Montgomery County. So when you have 3 out of 10 teachers who are against this stuff, how do you implement? And so did you want to say something?
Right. Yeah. So it's to that point, because you mentioned that there is this massive opposition, right? And I may be mistaken, but from what I have seen, that there's this political, this fervor and this massive reaction has been playing out, at least in a wide scale, has been sort of the talking points of a lot of the conservatives and the central issue of the conservative movement. It's not saying it hasn't been the case, but in a much more concentrated fashion, much more recently, right? So I'm wondering, what if this was done 6 years ago?
I think,
and this is a counterfactual, I guess. We can't prove a counterfactual, but if this was done before this, this thing became, much more flashpoint.
No, you're right. You're right.
And that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, no, we don't need to go backwards, but I will take your question. And the answer is because of Florida's don't say gay law, and because of these 2 years of these horrible laws, these very fascist laws that are crumbling under the courts because they're unconstitutional. And so, for your viewers, since we only have a limited amount of time, I mean, to boil this all down in a nutshell is Montgomery County is doing this, and the exact antithesis of that is the Florida don't say gay law. Okay. And so everyone is kind of somewhere in the middle. And, MCPS put out a statement today that hopefully we can get to your viewers through a link, which is basically just a 2-pager of the antithesis of the don't say gay law, but it's taken school districts and schools a while to figure that out. And it's more of a reaction to these laws. I mean, the don't say gay laws, and there's been a bunch of other ones, but the original Florida one was strictly this: allowing opt-outs and allowing parental notifications. So when you ask, why is this happening? Because now they have a playbook, and these folks are part of maybe a certain political party or a certain, hardcore religious group. And we get their emails too, Alliance Defending Freedom and these groups. And it's all handed to them in a nice playbook. And so that's why it's being played out in Montgomery County, but it's embarrassing because the passion isn't there. And this is not what we're about in Maryland and not what we're about in Montgomery County. And that's why I'm confident, in our state, especially with our new leadership at the state. And it's been wonderful to get the support of the federal government. This is the time to attack it and to fight back. And even less progressive counties, I consider Howard County maybe a little bit even less progressive than Montgomery County, who is by far one of the most progressive jurisdictions in the whole country. Even folks that are in less of a progressive environment, I'm super confident that we can flesh out the misinformation, and we really have such a strong foundation to everywhere in the school systems, the policy and the regulations, in the county law and the state law. It is just so mind-boggling to me, why it is not happening sooner. So now I think is the time, and I think you mentioned about allies, and I have notes here, this is the time, I think, for allies to stand up. This has turned into not an LGBTQ issue. It's a civil rights issue. It's a social justice issue. Just in Montgomery in the last couple of weeks, the passion has been from people that aren't even allies. I mean, they're not people like Ying and myself. There are people that are they might not even know an LGBT person or have anyone in their family, and they are outraged. And so that, I think, is the context now that this is something that people feel needs to be countered. And I think they know that because, let's say for Moms for Liberty, it's not just LGBTQ. There's a whole target for marginalized groups. And that's why I think the silver lining is you talk about progressive groups in Howard County or Maryland or Montgomery County, this is our time to really stand up and make a statement on how this stuff, we can't let this happen.
And yeah, oh, sorry, Ying, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna add to one point. I think Mark made some excellent points, and then to put things in a backdrop of making social change, I always believe that there are two factors. One, you do have to have the cultural shift at the ground level, people starting to be more aware of these issues, if we're talking about LGBTQ issues. They see their neighbors, they see LGBTQ people as part of their lives, their coworkers, neighbors, family members. And the other piece of it is the policy change. But those two factors play out, there's interconnected, because you don't have policies that are progressive unless on the ground level in public opinion, people are more accepting of people of different identities, people are different from you, and then of these ideas would take hold. That can facilitate policy change. And with the more progressive policy, more people will be more comfortable coming out, being themselves. And that way it would all, create a positive feedback loop. Then people will see, these are just people. And then the other point I want to make is that my initial reaction when I saw the opt-out, and I agree with Mark, this is really not just about a few books. They do have larger goals. They really want to pass hopefully in Maryland, there's not a chance to have anything remotely resembling what's happening in Florida or Texas. Otherwise, I would have to move. But their goal is larger. But just to the initial latching onto these opt-out option, when I saw the lawsuit, my two reactions were, well, first of all, this is actually paradoxically, I think it's a sign of progress. Because if we didn't have anything like that in the school system at all, no one was even explicitly mentioning books. My uncle's wedding was not even allowed in books or in schools, and no one was comfortable using that and wasn't aware of that, then this wouldn't be an issue. The other point is, when I saw they were talking about opting out when these books are being read, I was thinking that the way they describe it as, for sexually explicit material. First of all, I doubt many of the protesters who were at these rallies actually have read the books, because I made a point of getting those books from our library. Fortunately, we do have them in circulation. If they read the books, maybe they would actually, some of them who are, a little bit more intellectual curiosity and honesty would help to read the book and say, this doesn't look like there's anything sexually explicit in there. Because if they actually read the book and still think those books were sexually explicit, then my question would be, how much more are you going to opt out? Because if a teacher talks about a family, a kid shares about family with mom and dad, or I went to my uncle's wedding who actually married a woman, isn't that the same thing as your uncle married a guy? Because logical thinking is not going to be a strong suit for people who are at the rallies and really whipped up to a frenzy. And I think that I lay really at the feet of groups that are taking this as an opportunity to advance their own political agenda at the cost of not only the LGBTQ students, staff, and families, but actually the immigrant families who are trying to get more information about their kids. They're getting misinformation, and they're, getting all the fear and ignorance shared with them, and without the opportunity to learn what's happening. And that's not beneficial to anyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And it's, you expect this type of behavior from a group like Moms for Liberty, but, it has been a little disappointing to see even groups like CARE sort of, somewhat leading the charge on this, even if they do try to add some plausible deniability and say, oh, no, it's not about bigotry. But, maybe it is, maybe it isn't for the leadership, but nonetheless, certainly a lot of people hearing the message are definitely taking it in a bigoted way. And so, on sort of that subject of, what does it mean to be an ally? Mark talked about, a lot of the community's response to this, and it sounds like there has been a lot of encouraging support, and that's good to hear. But I'm curious, Mark, like what has been the reaction from like the county council members, the county executive, county administration in general, who I imagine is like the real targets of this pressure campaign?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And the context for that, I think, is, you know, I think the reason we're here and this conversation could be a really advantage for your county, because we were the first to kind of dig in deep to these different layers, but like hopefully the next will be able to preempt some of this. And you know, when you speak of allies and things, like I would hope that there could be some engagement, and starting with your group and such like that, because I guarantee it is coming. And Ying knows a little bit, but with my work at the Maryland State Legislature, it was a brutal session for anything LGBTQ. So Moms for Liberty is the main, and they have a massive agenda. It's not just these ELA books, right? It is massive, and it's coming. It came to Carroll County in the sense of more of the health curriculum. So it'll be big this fall, and it'll be a statewide issue, and it'll be a county issue. So the good news is you all have some foundational base, because you know we're really in a standstill over here and kind of a holding pattern. You'd think that our leaders would be really outspoken on it, and it's been shocking that they're not. Okay, so we got caught up in a very difficult situation. I'm happy. I think we're all happy to kind of help you navigate that, in the sense of it's become these progressives versus these people of color. And you all see the pictures. And so we're hypersensitive to not escalating that. So we're in a little bit of a holding pattern. I mean, we did not go after care. We did not go after, you know, we tried not to take any kind of religious approach. It was just too volatile, right? And you know, if we talk in a week, maybe things have changed. But right now, the majority of our council people, the majority of our Board of Education people, they will not touch this. They might say happy Pride and we like inclusivity, but it is so volatile right now. If our leaders say anything, it is a direct dig at our immigrant Muslim community, mostly of color. And so we're being patient, but in the next few days, something broke today on Kojo Nan show at noon. On Will Jawander, one of our council members, said something that was very helpful in terms of supporting this. But no one is touching, basically no one is touching the dichotomy between religious freedom and LGBTQ. We will, and we're helping them as advocates thread those needles. But our main goal as advocates was de-escalation. You do not imagine how out of control this was. There is not the logistics to handle 1,000 people at a Board of Education meeting in Montgomery County. We learned from Glendale, Arizona, Glendale, California. Our school district was amazing. They took what happened in Glendale 2 weeks ago, where there was violence. And our school district worked with their school district to come up with like a security plan for this protest, and also for this anti-misinformation campaign. And that's what the school district released yesterday, in terms of like a 2-pager, really to de-escalate and to take folks down to the basics of this is not an LGBTQ curriculum, and you know, just give the facts and we can start from there. But hopefully no other district will have to start the conversation from a really racially religious charged lens. And it's, you say you're progressive, this group, you know, I'm from Montgomery County, so I'm not real familiar with it, but like, this is tearing our progressives apart because, you know, we'll get through it, and these conversations are starting to happen. But like, even CARE, I mean, CARE has always been a partner with a lot of our progressive groups. CARE is an organization that's a national organization that is really the leader in civil rights for Muslim community. But even our progressive leaders are really having to have these really tough conversations, and they're going in the right direction. It'll be fine. We're going to have some joint statements and blah, blah, blah. But this is really raw when you have the epic dichotomy of two very marginalized communities. There's no winning when you pit two of those against each other. And so I'm confident that we say it's like peeling an onion, right? We just could not have had these conversations. We had 2 protests. The first one was beginning of June, and the last was the end of June. But in those 3 weeks, we could not have those conversations because it was too volatile. So you peel an onion and you get deeper and deeper to the core, and you're able to have more of these foundational issues. So again, it goes back to the original question about why did it take so long? And then it goes to what Ying said in terms of this being very layered and multifaceted. There is no way we can all sit down and take an hour course on LGBTQ, how we're going to do this. Okay, let's do it. It's done. Now we can move on. It is just so deep rooted and so ingrained that organizations like Ying's, in terms of Carrie, that is a brilliant way to dig into these. And it's a sustained organization because there is so much work, right? And once we can knock this down in a school system, that'll reverberate, but it's still a struggle. We do not have an organization like Carrie. That is an amazing model for the whole country. We do not have a full-time LGBTQ kind of liaison in Montgomery County. And we are the biggest school district by far. And so, I just have to note that Howard County is one of the leaders really in our state with some of these issues, right? They're leading in a lot of these initiatives that is for parents and groups like this that are really pushing the envelope. So I think that's good news for your county.
Thanks Mark and Ying. I want to express my concern and analysis, and I'll get your reaction. Hopefully I express it in a non-meandering way, and we'll get there. To start with, I feel like time, at least in Maryland, I'm not talking about other states, I feel like time was on our side. And I say this because, so in 2017 or 2017 or 2018, I'm just giving an example here, when the new superintendent in Howard County was hired, one of the first things that he did was, I think that one of the first initiatives was hire a diversity and equity a DEI officer, right? Dr. Gilbert. And so there was, these discussions were going on long before, it's 2023 now, 5-6 years ago, these discussions were going on. And in Maryland, just by, I feel like we don't use the opportunities that we have in a proactive way for these important issues. And to me, that's my biggest concern. So to a question of why did it take so long, there was a response, for example, that there was no training, or there was not adequate training going on, right? And so why wasn't there adequate training going on? We knew that there was, we knew 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there was, bigotry. I mean, this was not, it's not a new thing. And yet, the school system, granted, they're dealing with a lot of other issues. There was no, in a holistic way, there was no concerted movement to provide this education, to provide this training, to spend money, to allocate enough money for these programs. And I'm concerned about, at least from my point of view, we don't take the time that we have and use it wisely, and to implement these programs. I mean, in Maryland should be one of the only states, I mean, one of the main states to have codified a woman's right to choose, right? But it's not codified, right? What are we waiting for? So, here we are, this progressive, state, this blue state, and all the meaning, we have a super majority in the Senate, the House and Senate. We've had a Democrat governor for years, before Hogan, and then Hogan, was for 8 years, but we could override his veto, anytime we want. And none of these things were taken, none of these actions were taken. And so I guess going back to, the allies, right? Who are the allies? These are the people that we elect, the politicians that we elect. Many of them are Democrat in Howard County and Montgomery County. These are supposed to be the allies. These are supposed to be elected on these issues. I mean, they go out there and say nice things about these issues. And, so I guess the question is, are they really allies?
I can maybe try to answer that first. In a way, you answered your own question because you said two key words. One is holistic, the other is proactive. And my activism coincidentally began around the same time when the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion was created in our school system, not long after our current superintendent took office here. And so I actually saw firsthand that some of the behind the scenes push on that. So the office has been around, not very, very long, but I think the holistic approach is definitely something that there's a whole lot of room to, a room of improvement that we can make, because they look at issues, racial justice, LGBTQ issues, immigrant rights, and disability rights, neurodiversity, and all different kinds of identities, inclusivity issues as very siloed. So they have people to we'll do the racial justice training, we'll do restorative justice training, again, from outside groups, and we'll add on the LGBTQ issue. And on that, I want to note that supporting LGBTQ community is being more vocal about it is a relatively new phenomena. It definitely did not happen right away with the creation of the Office DEI, because this issue has always been seen, unfortunately, by some, even in our ally community, as something that makes people uncomfortable, because we don't want to talk about it, and I don't understand it. And then the other side of this, some allies feel like I'm not knowledgeable about the issues. What if I, misgender people, say the wrong things, offend people? And to that, I always say that there's no such thing as a perfect ally. I would rather everyone to show up and willing to learn and willing to engage and support, even if you don't do things perfectly, because we are not looking for perfection. Much better to just be there, because as a parent of a trans kid, I can tell you that I made so many mistakes and then apologize, learn, move on. And that's how we can become a better ally. But overall, after having been involved in this work, I've definitely got the sense that people continuously saying, I want to be an ally, but I don't know, not comfortable. And I appreciate what you said about Carrie and the progress made, Mark, earlier in your remarks. But in Howard County, I think one of our biggest contributions is we push these conversations to the foreground, that people can't hide behind, oh, we're allies, but we don't want to be allies. We want to whisper our support. We want to be quiet about it because it makes me uncomfortable to talk about it. We want to talk about it everywhere, every day, all the time. That's why embedded and inclusive curriculum shouldn't be just an LGBTQ curriculum. You can have those. You can have a separate class or two. That's fine. That's great. But it should be just every day, because we don't have a straight curriculum, because we talk about that all the time. That's just normal way of having a family. So why should people with different identities and different backgrounds be part and parcel of all of our curriculum and different content areas? So to push the conversation to that level, that at every level, including elementary level and secondary level, we talk about these, because these are people, these are our students and their families with two dads. So why should they be hidden from plain view? To have those conversations more openly and pushed back against some of the ugly side has been one of the most rewarding changes on my side, what I can see. And I think that takes time and takes groups concerted effort to do that. And you need allies everywhere. And to answer your question about that's more of a holistic approach and proactive approach. I think part of it really it boils down to you have enough money, budgetary support, enough staff Because if you have one, Danielle, our first ever in the state too, in Howard County, not just in, our district, but entire Maryland, she's the first full-time LGBTQIA plus specialist designated full-time position. She's doing 5 people's job, and she's been phenomenal this past year. That's not sustainable. For any work to be done proactively, you need you need enough staff. I'm not saying we should have a whole army of people doing this. I wish we could that, but I'm realistic. I know our budget is not unlimited. And to have more people engaging in this who are passionate and skilled at their work is a requisite for any kind of proactive action, because the Office of DEI, from what I have seen, has been mostly putting out fires, because it's just that's the reality. And it's a little bit different issue there because they do have a separate office, a lot more power, and bigger office and staff, and versus just Danielle, a little bit low, a lot lower on the totem pole than I would like. And so that's maybe a little bit different issue there with the Office of DEI, but we haven't really been doing a great job with looking at these issues holistically and attacking the issue proactively.
Can I just try to put a tiny pin of it before you ask your next question or we move on? One thing that's very helpful, leading to what Ying was talking about, that I use in spaces like this, is that it'll help your viewers really understand the context and the pragmaticism of all this, is that there is no curriculum piece. We say, there's no curriculum piece out there. So we can pass a state law like the ICA, ISA, Inclusive Schools Act, or Howard County and MCPS can have these, but there is really no one. And even with what we're talking about here in Montgomery County, multiple schools and multiple teachers did not do this, right? And so there's just not the resources to go and provide that oversight. But I think this will help your audience understand the difference between like allies on like a leadership level and a political level. In a lot of ways, they're playing politics. And so even if they were perfect allies, it's not necessarily as impactful. The allies need to be the troops on the ground, right? Every single one of us, these 70% or something, go in and ask, well, where is that? Why aren't my kids learning this? I mean, it doesn't have to be an official approval for a book. There's tons of books that are inclusive that teachers could be using. So even in Montgomery County, like we can have it top down and say everyone has to do this. They don't all do it. The real success of these is when there's passion, and that's not going to come from our common council member being the perfect ally, because they have to stay in office too. It's going to be from kind of that concept of ally at the very personal level. And that's what we need to kind of drum up, because it's school by school, class by class. And that's what's been happening here in Montgomery County. Just people you wouldn't expect going in there and be like, oh my God, my kid just spent 6 months in this classroom and there's been no ounce of any kind of recognition of an LGBT experience or family. And I think that's really helpful. But again, I know we don't have all day, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, I want to, share sort of a thought on, the ally question, and pass it back to the interviewees to see what their sort of thoughts on it are. And so the way I sort of look at it is there's a lot of different ways to potentially be an ally, because there's a lot of different like needs that need to be met, and ways that you can show support. And there are some ways to be an ally that literally like cost you nothing, like for the county in Howard County, which I believe they just did for the first time ever this year, for the county to raise a rainbow flag on Pride Month cost the county nothing to do. It's zero, beside maybe like $5 or $10 for the flag itself, but virtually cost them nothing. And those are what I would consider, or even just like a council member making a statement in support of the LGBTQ plus community currently under attacks. That is another thing that costs nothing, at least in terms of monetary value. Maybe it might, maybe the politician's scared that, oh, well, it's going to, get people who disagree with me to criticize me. But at least, in terms of money, it costs them nothing. And so those sorts of changes in ways of showing support, I consider that to be like symbolic gestures of support and, symbolic allyship. And I'm not going to say that that has no value, because I think that it absolutely does have value. If it didn't have any value, the county wouldn't have been so resistant to raising that flag in the first place. And so this isn't to say that, these, symbolic gestures of support and allyship don't mean anything, because again, I think that they do. But then there's another big category of being an ally of, let's face it, a lot of these needs that, LGBTQ plus, adults and students need, they do cost a lot of money. It is going to cost a lot, potentially tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars to meet these needs. And that, to me, is not a reason that we shouldn't try pursuing them, because, as Mark and Ying have said, a lot of these changes that we're now trying to introduce should have just been the status quo for years, and it hasn't. And so I think, we should spend whatever amount of money it takes to make things how they should be. And one huge example is, I've got this is from the National Library of Medicine. It says data indicates that 82% of transgender individuals have considered killing themselves, and 40% have attempted suicide, with suicidality highest among transgender youth. And all of that is to say there's a massive mental health support need among LGBTQ plus communities, especially amongst young people, and even physical health care needs for things like hormonal treatments and all that. And this stuff is not going to be cheap. It's going to cost a lot of money, especially considering how far behind the county is on this. And so all that is to say, yes, there's a way to support people symbolically, and it doesn't cost you anything. But then what's a little bit harder is when it comes to taking on these other changes, which are also very substantive, but are going to cost a lot of money. And, Ying brings up, well, the budget is not unlimited. And so when you have the symbolic changes, there is several different interest groups that you're worried about. You're worried about the LGBTQ plus community itself, obviously. And then the only other interest group to think about is the anti-LGBTQ plus people and how they're going to react. And so that's the calculus politicians are making for that. And, more often than not, I think they make the calculation that doing the symbolic show of support is good, because there are more pro-LGBTQ plus people out there nowadays than there are anti-LGBTQ plus people. They don't always make that calculation, as we're seeing now, but sometimes they make that calculation. But when it comes to the material ways of supporting these needs that are going to cost a lot of money, the interest groups are very different. You have, again, the LGBTQ plus community, but then you have the moneyed interests, the corporate power, the ones who they're the reason we don't have all this tax money to fund these, genuine needs, because they haven't been paying their fair share of taxes. And the reason they've been able to get away with that is they've bought off a majority of our county government. And so, I want to circle all this back to the MoCo thing. Mark, let's say hypothetical scenario that a lot of the council members in Montgomery County did come out strongly in support verbally about standing with the LGBTQ plus community. Let's say hypothetically they all did that. I would say, does that alone, coming out, rhetorically, symbolically, especially at a time like that, does that alone make them an ally if meanwhile, while they're also elected to county council, they're giving all of these, hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks to corporations, to developers that are creating this lack of, money to fund, mental and physical health care supports for LGBTQ plus children who need it. And that's just one example, but there's plenty of other examples where you could show, oh, well, you're saying you're an ally, but your actions are your actions and your votes are contradicting that. So I want to see, what are your guys' thoughts on sort of that? Sorry, I was went on a little monologue there, but.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think even before I answer, maybe if Ying wants to go first, it's a really unique context. I don't know if Howard County folks know this, but we are one of the most unique jurisdictions of 1.1 million people in the country. You cannot find one non-democratic elected official in our entire jurisdiction. I mean, it's remarkable. And this has been one of the impetuses why we finally were able to push forward with a lot of this is like the footing was so remarkable on our side that it's like they had no choice. But I mean, if you go through it, all three state reps, all two senators, the governor, all county council, like 11 of them, all board of education, all 34 state reps. It's just phenomenal. Like, so that's a big pro, but the downside is, I got to consider them all allies, right? Or I'll get in big trouble. But I think we go back to your point about the easy stuff, right? We call it low hanging fruit. And there are, many things that drive me crazy that are the easy things that we're not doing. We passed a law because you all have a great, I don't know if she's still there, but a really great council person that is really pro on these things. And you passed your restroom thing where like single stall restrooms when you go to Starbucks are now non-gendered, right? So we took that and we passed it here in Montgomery County. But a year and a half later, it's not being implemented, right? So I'm still going to Starbucks, I'm still going to Chipotle, and there's still male, female, and like all these ladies waiting to use the bathroom in the men's bathroom. And this is not even an LGBT thing, right? It's just a normal thing. And so it's like stuff like that. People get lazy, and whether it comes to curriculum and implementing affirming restrooms, like our folks are considered allies, but they can't be lazy, and we need to hold them accountable to at least this low-hanging fruit. So that'll be my kind of beginning part. I don't know, Ying, if you wanted to directly answer his question or not.
Sure. Well, first of all, we're not that lucky. We do have a few Republican friends in our elected office, and I wouldn't say, I guess most of the elected officials in Howard County, by certain kind of definition, they are allies. They do make symbolic gestures, like what Jake mentioned about raising the flag, and it was a little surprising it took so many years. It's a flag that we're not leading the charge, that we're not Carroll County. I'm glad it happened. But to answer your question, Jake, I think to me, my thought on this is I don't have the luxury as a ally, as a parent of a trans kid, to be applying any kind of purity test. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking what kind of allies any particular person is. There's allyship on a whole spectrum. Do I really think people who have tremendous power should use their power to do proportionally powerful things to make things happen instead of just the low-hanging fruit and then the symbolic gestures? Yes, absolutely. I welcome the symbolic gestures because I think those are helpful too. We got to do all of the above. It's not either or. You do the symbolism or you do substantive change. No, you can't choose, pick and choose. I want them to do more, to do both, ideally. But if they do one of them, and I'm fully aware of a lot of the political calculation, and so I feel that for activists like ourselves, our job is to continue pushing them and demand more. You can't stop at raising a flag and issuing a resolution. All those things are great, but what else can you do? And you have your, again, your expectation, the expectation for what you can do needs to be matched against the power you have in an elected office versus your average parent who can speak up, who can do a lot of things, but they don't control the power of the purse string. They don't control policies. They can speak up and do all that, but there's definitely a power differential. So other people who can show up and may not be perfect allies, and again, we don't have enough people doing all of that, so we can't really do any kind of a purity test. I'm willing to work with almost anyone. I don't know how I feel about working with Moms for Liberty, but I think people who have a genuine desire to really do create a more inclusive environment for all kids. And like Mark mentioned, that through the Montgomery County, the last few months, you really have I've seen the signature on the petition. It's a beautiful document, not only how it's written, but also just to see the signers. It's from such a wide range of people in the county and outside the county too, right? A small percentage are not from Montgomery County, but they're just, you don't think that's the first issue top of their list, but they do see why this is important because it really goes beyond just supporting LGBTQ people.
So let's take it, I guess, on that same theme of we have the politicians and even corporations who do these symbolic things. They post the flags on their social media, on their avatar. They raise the flag, but then they make terrible decisions that affect the county's ability to provide resources. I became aware of this recently, that the county and I think most jurisdictions use a study that was done like decades ago in terms of the standard for how many for how many school counselors should be in any school. I think it's like 250 to 1 or something, but that study was done decades ago, and so why not 100 to 1 or 50 to 1, right? But that needs money, and I'm okay naming names. In Howard County, you have council members Opal Jones, Cristiano Rigby, with a Republican, David Youngman, making terrible decisions on every month that adversely impact the school system, in concert with the county executive, that have an adverse impact on the school system. Meanwhile, the Democrats are saying nice things about marginalized communities. So how can we make it uncomfortable for people like that to from exploiting these important issues for their own gain, political gain, while advancing true allies, and I appreciate there might be it might not be easy for people who are doing because Ying, you said you don't have the luxury to sort of pick and choose, but like just more broadly speaking, though, how can we make it uncomfortable for people like that to thrive in this ecosystem?
I would say the end goal for me personally is not to make them uncomfortable, but to educate. Maybe it has an indirect effect in that, but to me, the larger goal is to educate our citizens, our residents in the community about all of these issues, how they're connected. Because what we want, the final goal is to effectively advocate for more resources. And if the people can't put 2 and 2 together, put all those pieces together in a puzzle, they might not actually see. And in that process, if we make the elected officials uncomfortable, so be it. They're elected to be held accountable. I'm not an activist trying to be friends with any elected officials. Their job is there to serve all of us. And these issues being connected requires your people who are busy with their lives and job and family to understand how they're connected. So for all of us, whether we're focusing on the LGBTQ issues, focusing on advocating for the special ed, having more sufficient budget so the teachers don't have to struggle with the lack of resources, and the mental health counselors, that data you cited, that was, I think that ratio they came up with that was from 100 years ago almost. So it's amazing that we haven't have updated our information and resources support in that regard. So all of these requires people to work together, which comes back to, we don't have the luxury of applying purity tests, because I know building a coalition with people advocating for particular kind of funding would run into people who I probably don't share values with on all different issues, but understanding how we're in this together and it shouldn't be a zero-sum game, how we can all advance our own issue without harming any other community. So that's a larger question to educate ourselves and talking to each other, talking to other advocates, and to build a broad coalition. I think it's the only way to go. Otherwise, we're just going to be so balkanized, and then we're going to be pitted against each other by people with their own agenda, and which we see that happening oftentimes. So as an advocate and activist, that's my focus. Along the way, I'm sure that makes certain people uncomfortable, but so be it. That's not my job to make them comfortable.
And Mark, you're free to respond to that as well. But if you don't have anything to say, this is the last question, then we're going to close it out. I'm sorry, we've gone a little long, but I think it's been a good discussion, and thank you both for participating. Hiruy kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we've been talking about being an LGBTQ plus ally, either a perfect ally or imperfect ally. I agree with Ying that they can still play positive effects in different ways and in different contexts. But we've been talking about allies in terms of elected officials, in terms of community members, but Hiruy mentioned briefly corporations, and corporations I feel like are another one who, they like to, tweet out something for Pride Month, put a, rainbow flag on their avatar. And so my question is, what does it mean for a corporation to be a true ally? Because, right now here in Howard County, we have a Starbucks in Ellicott City trying to unionize. Some of their workers are in the LGBTQ plus community. I think Starbucks is one of these, liberal corporations who is, putting out, oh, we love gay people, but they're fighting super hard against their, potentially gay workers, getting paid a fair wage and making sure that they can pay all their bills. And so, I guess that's my question is, how would you all like to see, corporations or self-described corporate allies, sort of engage with those issues?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I tend to take everything kind of through the lens of our students, and most notably Montgomery County Public School students, but I would think it would relate to Howard County Public School System students as well. I think through the lens of most kids, they see it very clear, right? Like they don't have this lens that we do through politics and everything. And I think they'll see through corporations because they just see what they're getting, right? Like I know we have healthcare through my husband's company, and they're a big organization and they have great pride parades, everything, but like my kids and I, we don't feel a lot of that superficiality, right, in our day to day, because there are still some big hurdles for whether it's care for LGBTQ youth and care for same gender families and things like that. And I think this happens across the board with a lot of companies, and it goes back to what we talked about politicians as well. Is I think our students really take it just from a very kind of immediate effect, and with corporations, like I don't think our students, especially our middle school students and elementary school students, are being like, oh, wow, Google has this rating of 10, whatever, 100% from the HRC code, and therefore, or Twitter, for example, well, this is a very dangerous experience that Twitter is engaging in with, dead naming and blah, 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 blah. So I think it's much non-linear, for our students and things that like, the superficiality of these kind of corporate pride, things that these corporations have been doing over the last couple of decades. Like, I think that's becoming much more nuanced now. And, they're facing, complete backlash, like at the Target and the Bud Light and things at Budweiser. And so I think it's all in the mix right now. Like, I think it's going to come down to kind of the lived experience, whether it's through a lens of an adult or lens of a student. And, I'm always looking out for the students because like they, are really affected by these things, right? Like really affected by these symbols and when they don't feel valued. And that comes through often, I think, in the corporate speak. So that's my take on it.
At the risk of stating the obvious, corporations are not about supporting pride or not. It's about the bottom line. So whatever they do, it's really about trying to make sure their market share will continue to grow and they're popular. That's why sometimes they react the way to backlashes the way they have, right? It's just really always walking this fine line. I don't want to lose any customers, don't want anyone to boycott us. So I don't think the corporations are not people. They don't really have values or religious belief. What they do have is the power of symbolism that they can engage in, which I think is important. And I totally agree. And I think it gives me hope with what Mark said about young people see through that so clearly. But what the other thing they can do, they have tremendous power in shaping policy in their own corporations and outside those corporations at a national level through lobbying. So that's where, as activists, we push them to do. And young people are doing that, and people can vote with their dollars, with their feet. But to have people understand that and make sure all the young people understand that is going back to what we started this with, education. If we don't have our educational system talking about different issues, we can't even mention pride in some school districts, in some states, then how would this be part of a civic lesson? How can they be expected to understand the complexity and the nuances of this, right? So they're not going to grow up to be the kind of citizen we want them to be, to understand and to someday run the world and make it a better place. So we just got to go back to what we've been doing at the schools.
Yes. Well, thank you both. And yeah, I agree. You know, there are different levels of allies. Some more sincere than others, but you know, you should take them all for what they're worth, and you know, put the pressure on to get the most out of it that we can. And so thank you both, Ying and Mark, for coming on and talking about you know, both what's happening in Montgomery County. And I agree with Mark that you know, I hate to admit it, but I'm almost certain that there will be a similar attempt to censor content and whatever form it may take here in Howard County and other counties. I think they're all like kind of consolidating in the counties where they see the most opportunity right now. But I think it will slowly spread. Our Howard County young Republicans, I think, were, you know, showing support of what's going on in Montgomery County. And so it's definitely good to hear, you know, how other counties have already dealt with this, so we can learn from that. So without any further ado, happy Pride Month to everybody. Thank you for tuning in. This was episode 27 of the Progressive Democrats of Howard County. If you'd like to join our email list, follow us on social media, become a dues paying member, etc., you can do all of that and more at our link tree. It's linktr.ee/HOCO Progressives. Mark, I don't know if you wanted to shout anything out.
No, I'm all good, and you know, thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation.
Cool, thank you. I saw you come off mute. I didn't know if you were gonna shout something, but thank you, everybody. We will see you all for episode 28 soon.